Yeah, I'm Sam. Excited to be doing this. And I appreciate so many people coming out. We've been doing Ken sessions for a while, and 40 people is probably on the higher side for it. So yeah, yeah, thank you everyone for being here. Yeah, I'm going to be presenting research I just completed over the last 2 years. And yeah, it's titled Planting the Seeds for Knowledge Exchange in Canadian Forestry, Perspectives from Forest Professionals on Trust, Barriers, and Preferences. Oh, are you going to work? There we go. So a quick agenda. I will be going over some background, my methods, results and discussion, and recommendations that came out of my research. So background. So forestry is an essential part of the Canadian landscape, economy, and identity. However, forests and forest industries are changing due to the environmental and social pressures facing forestry, such as climate change, changing forest fire patterns, invasive species, and the recognition of forest values beyond timber. So, as forests and demands on forests continue to change, it's becoming increasingly important that forest professionals be able to access and use the latest scientific knowledge to make the best and most sustainable decisions. While it might seem or be obvious to folks here, research and knowledge are important to forest professionals because it can help inform decision making and can help lead to better and more sustainable decisions. So, for example, when research identifies an endangered bird species, it can lead to legal protections and operational limits that forest professionals must consider. Or research can help determine how different trees respond to different soil types and therefore providing guidance on planting. But before I want to go further, I want to clarify who forest professionals are. Not that I necessarily need to do this for this group, but here we are. Forest professionals is actually an umbrella term for the two types of accredited foresters in Canada. So that's registered professional foresters and forest technicians. So to obtain an RPF designation, you typically have to go do a 4-year degree. And then for forest technicians or FPs, it's a 2-year college diploma as like the minimum. So these accreditations are provincially managed and regulated. An example of something that forest professionals are required to do to maintain their accreditation is engage in continuing education or competency hours. So examples of the types of jobs that an RPF person or forest technician would have. So for an RPF, it would be like forest management planner, silviculture forester, wildlife management specialist, specialist in forest health, and or sorry, forest health officer. There's me. And then for forest technicians, it would be like timber cruiser, harvesting supervisor, road and layout engineer technician, and silviculture technician. So forest technicians jobs, the way I think of it, is generally be seen as more of the hands-on, whereas RPFs are broadly speaking more focused on forest management. So how knowledge moves between researcher and forest professional is through a process known as knowledge exchange. Knowledge exchange can be defined as the multi-directional flow of ideas and information between producers and users of knowledge. This definition comes from Dr. Lana Westwood in a 2023 study she published on exchange. In Alana's paper, the authors propose a new typologies for categorizing knowledge exchange efforts and techniques. And these include one-way exchange, where scientists independently produce a scientific report or paper and deliver it to knowledge users. This is our sort of most traditional form of knowledge exchange. Solicited exchange, in which a knowledge user invites a knowledge producer to tackle a pre-identified knowledge gap. Network exchange is where people come together. So an example of this would be a conference. And then participatory exchange, where users and producers of knowledge like work together to co-create or co-produce knowledge. So there's a lot of research out there generally about knowledge exchange. However, I won't get into too much detail right now for the sake of time. But what I will say is that a majority of research focuses on the sort of facilitators and barriers to effective knowledge exchange. So in a 2007 paper, Mitten and al. Organized these barriers into into barriers and facilitators in these four broad categories of individual, organizational, communications, and time related. One of these these factors, and I'm going to highlight this because it becomes a central theme of my research, is trust. So trust would fall under middle like individual category. And trust in the research is consistently found to be a really important facilitator of knowledge exchange, whereas like distrust can hinder it. So this brings me to like the crux of what inspired this research, which is that forest professionals rely on scientific knowledge, especially now as forests and demands on forests are evolving. And that knowledge exchange is an essential process, ensuring that knowledge produced is actually gets into the hands of decision makers, managers, users, and in this context, RPS and FTs. To ensure effective knowledge exchange, knowledge producers must be considering knowledge exchange throughout the design and research process. However, how forest professionals engage and would prefer to engage in knowledge exchange until now is currently unknown. So with this in mind, here are my research questions, and I sort these into two clusters or chapters because when I am in my results and discussion, this is how I'll be organizing them. So for my cluster one or chapter one, so how do forest professionals in Canada engage in knowledge exchange and what are their preferred formats? What barriers to engaging in knowledge exchange and with research do forest professionals experience? And how do current and preferred knowledge exchange methods and barriers to them differ across demographic groups? So then for my cluster, chapter two. So what's the status of trust between forest professionals and researchers in Canada from the perspective of forest professionals? And what are the factors influencing forest professionals' trust in research? So going to my methods. So to answer these research questions, I use an explanatory mixed methods approach. So this includes three phases, including a quantitative and then a qualitative and then a final third phase where you sort of bring the results together. So for the first phase, I distributed a survey across Canada through the Professional Forestry Association of Canada. And though this was like a quantitative phase, I did have some qualitative questions in my survey. And in the survey, I do primarily focus on answering like the research, the chapter one, cluster one research questions about knowledge exchange. And then for phase two, I did semi-structured interviews, and these primarily focused on answering those cluster chapter two questions about trust. So going to my results, so starting with like the demographics of who my respondents were. So firstly, looking at the survey participants. So I had 139 respondents. I had roughly equal numbers of RPFs and FDs. I had representation from across Canada. Regarding jobs, majority of respondents worked in forest management or on the ground forest technician roles. And additionally, a majority of respondents worked in private industry or government, with the final 30% working in forest councils, nonprofits, community forests, or were self-employed. And also 32% of my respondents were women or another gender, and 68% were men. Now looking at the interviews, or the semi-structured interviews. So I interviewed 10 people. 4 were forest technicians and 6 were RPF. Majority of my respondents came from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick or from BC and Alberta. Nobody from Central Canada responded to a request for an interview. The interviews were only conducted in English, and a majority of my respondents worked in forest management and in the private sector. Now get into the meat and the potatoes of my research. So I'm also going to be doing the results and discussion together just because I find it easier and it helps to make sense of the results. So yeah. Mm-hmm. So like I said, I'm going to be focusing first on the chapter one, cluster one research questions. And you can see here on the side, I kind of track which research question I'm answering on that slide. So I guess looking at research questions 1 and 3. So current and preferred methods for knowledge exchange and whether there's differences across demographic groups. So of the 22 different knowledge exchange methods outlined in the survey, forest professionals primarily engage in knowledge exchange through online webinars like this, forestry magazines, on-the-job training, and field visits/tours. They least engage with it through mentorship activities, long learning courses by participating in research and hiring an intern or third party. I want to note that academic journals, which is one of the most traditional routes that academics and researchers will disseminate knowledge, came in at 11th. So regarding the preferences, the most preferred were field visits, on-the-job training, in-person conferences, and newsletters. And the least preferred were academic journals, social media, long learning courses, so that's 4+ hours, and hiring an intern or third party. While I'm not showing you the complete list here, it would just be like too overwhelming of a table to show that in the PowerPoint presentation. I can tell you that like of the top 10, 7 of the current methods were also in the 10 most preferred methods, suggesting that there's some positive overlap there. An interesting observation from the preferred methods is that there was a preference for in-person forms of knowledge exchange and that the preferred formats align with how forest professionals are easily able to obtain continuing education or competency hours. So looking at this from the typology that I showed you in an earlier slide, the most current and preferred forms of knowledge exchange do fall under one-way or network forms of exchange. This is really interesting because a lot of knowledge exchange literature actually identifies participatory exchange as like the most effective form of knowledge exchange. And while from an effectiveness standpoint, this might be the case, if it's not necessarily how forest professionals want to be engaging in knowledge exchange, it might not necessarily be the best. But that said, I'm not saying that participatory exchange is not at all preferred. Participatory forms of exchange actually went from like being within the bottom 5 as a current method to 11th and 12th as a preferred method, suggesting that there is an interest in greater engagement with research than they're currently experiencing. Notably, like comparative analysis found that mid-career professionals and those with a postgraduate degree showed more interest in collaboration than like senior staff or those with lower levels of education. And this may reflect patterns seen in other fields. So Masuda et al. In a 2013 study found that late career teachers were more selective about the professional developments they were or being more picky into which ones they were going to, valuing only what they felt was quote, quote, worthwhile. Similarly experienced forestry professionals may be more selective in like what they're engaging in. So higher interest among postgraduates likely stem from like the greater familiarity with research. But like overall, younger and mid-career forest professionals and those with advanced degrees may be more open to collaboration and serve as strong like internal advocates for research in their organization. So these preferences and practices are all particularly important in light of forest professionals' views that research is vital and necessary component of forestry practices, really validating this research. So as one mid-career RPS said, I think science plays a vital role in forest industries. And survey results also reflected the sentiment with respondents highly rating the relevance of research to their work. So good. So looking at research question 2, so there were a number of barriers that forest professionals experience, and I grouped these into structural and research related. So the greatest structural barriers faced by respondents included poor process for communication with researchers and lack of time. So time as a barrier closely aligns with a ton of previous research, which suggests that time is a barrier. Women or other genders also indicated experiencing time as a barrier to a significantly greater degree than men. These results could be due to the invisible or hidden labor that research shows that women and minority groups are more likely to take on in the workplace. Invisible labor includes tasks such as managing others' emotions, organizing events, remembering important occasions like colleagues' birthdays. So activities that are central to workplace culture, but frequently go unrecognized or undercompensated. So time also appeared to exacerbate other barriers, such as the research-related barriers. So the research-related barriers include the use of academic jargon, and researchers' limited operational relevance. So these were the greatest barriers that were experienced. So the challenge posed by academic jargon aligns with, again, like a ton of previous research. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this barrier was reported more often by college graduates and forest technicians than those who had attended university or RPFs. This may be because university graduates and RPFs have like spent more time in academic settings and therefore more accustomed to use like academic language. So there were mixed perceptions actually about the relevance of research as a barrier. In the barriers survey question, perceived lack of relevance of research, including outdated findings or inapplicability of their work was not highly rated. However, this issue arose during the interviews and was reflected in the responses to my survey attitude questions. So 7 of my interviewees raised this concern, and one said, whereas a forest scientist can spend their entire career managing one narrow range of scientific nerdery that hopefully produces something useful. And it often does, but it's not like they have to go out and figure out how to apply that across a million acres. Others echoed the sentiment describing forestry research as siloed or too narrowly focused, which can make it difficult to apply research to broad management decisions or operational prescriptions. So like I said, time as a barrier exacerbates other barriers. So, and I think one forest technician that I spoke with like summarized this really well when they said there's an ongoing problem of capacity as employee pool shrinks and demands on foresters increase, leaving us with increasing pressures and little time to continue growing that knowledge. So finally, while this barrier wasn't highly rated in the survey so much, it was brought up in the interviews, and that is presentation quality can be a barrier, and that they can be not super engaging. One interviewee pretty bluntly said to me that, I'll be honest, some incredibly dry and boring, terribly done PowerPoint presentation. And so like the quality of that is clearly did show it to be like influencing factor. So regarding significant differences between groups for the barriers, majority of the differences that were statistically significant were between forest technicians and OPFs. So for example, relevance of research, accessibility of products, lack of relationships with researchers, unclear terminology and academic jargon, and unreliable access to internet were all experienced to a statistically greater degree by forest technicians than RPF, suggesting that forest technicians may not be seeing themselves reflected or being considered enough when producing knowledge exchange products. So moving into chapter 2. So these were the research questions primarily related to trust. I do want to highlight that this is the first assessment to my knowledge of the status of trust in research from a forest professional's perspective in Canada. And I see this as really important because, as I noted in the background, trust is continuously cited as a central pillar for knowledge exchange. So having this opportunity to do this and like, I want to say like be the voice for forest professionals and add to the conversation has been really fun and exciting. So looking at research question 4. So what is the status of trust between forest professionals and researchers in Canada from the perspective of forest professionals? So overall, the results present a nuanced picture with trust in research and researchers among forest professionals being moderately strong, despite some instances of distrust or negative experiences. So all interviewees, along with 17 of the 25 survey respondents who answered an optional survey question about their relationship with researchers, expressed some form of positive trust or generally positive relationship with or perspective of research or researchers. So an example of this quote is, I think it's a mostly positive experience. I enjoyed meeting with people doing work at the research forest. So additionally, when interviewees were asked to assess the overall state of relationships between forest professionals and researchers. So not just like their own experience, but what they saw was like the greater relationship or overall state. Their responses, I see it as falling along a spectrum, but all described a relationship as somewhere between moderate and good. So the way I see it is that like along the spectrum, the two ends of my spectrums are sort of these two quotes, and one being, I think it's uh, I think it's generally good. It's a lot better than what it used to be. And at the other side of the spectrum, it's never been bad. It still isn't bad. So that said, negative experiences happen or negative perceptions are present. 7 of my 25 survey respondents who responded to the optional survey question had some form of negative perception of research or researchers. And 7 of my interviewees had had some form of negative experience with researchers. So as one survey participant pretty bluntly said is, biologists are incompetent and a hindrance on the forest industry. However, as I already mentioned, based on the results of the interviews, trust did appear to be fairly resilient, and the isolated negative experience did not seem to deter forest professionals from engaging in future collaboration. Again, that said, research shows that repeat negative encounters can lead to lasting distrust or disengagement. So Davis et al. In a 2018 study found that ongoing struggle in the U.S. Forest Collaborative caused growing frustration. And similarly, in a Hoover and Stern 2014 study, showed that persistent negative public interactions led some forest service leaders to deep skepticisms, even when later experiences were positive. So moving into my final research question, what are the factors influencing forest professionals' trust in researchers? So forest professionals' trust in research and researchers was not determined by a single factor, but rather shaped by a constellation of influences and that interact in complex ways. So these include perceptions of researcher bias, expectations and process, personal and informal relationships, communications and respect, proximity, apathy to research, institutional and political constraint, and research affiliation. I'm not going to go over every single one of these for the sake of time, but I'd be happy to discuss it more later at the end. So going again, I'm only going to go over 3 of them. So this will be the first one. So perceptions of bias and trust are highly intertwined in forestry. This is supported by other research, which finds that they're highly correlated. Results suggest that when forest professionals perceive researchers to hold ideological or disciplinary biases, it could undermine their trust in both the researcher and their work and reduce their willingness to engage. So perceptions of researcher bias typically either lean towards the idea that forest professionals saw researchers as biased towards the environment. So an example of a quote from this is, people often think researchers are biased, especially those coming from the environmental backgrounds, and they're less likely to be well received within the forestry community or towards industry. So, example of a quote here is, there was an there were obviously people there that would love to see the timber barons come back and maximize growth and yield at all costs, but it was pretty easy to see where their biases lay from. And this was when speaking to somebody who was talking about their experience at university. So concerns about industry bias, well, all biases really, were often associated with economic incentives. So I thought a really great quote that sort of summarized this was, anytime there's a lot of money to be made, I'm kind of suspicious because humans have been bad for if there's money to be made, making things work. And so even in the hemlock thing, there's quite a bit of money to be made by the sale of pesticides, if you know what I mean. So in the literature, this often is referred to as funding effect or funding bias, a phenomenon where the source of funding influences the research outcome, typically in ways that favor the funder's interests. So together, these findings suggest that perceptions of researcher bias are shaped by both ideological and economic factors, which in turn can negatively affect the trust forest professionals place in researchers and their work. So trust in the research process was also something that strongly influenced many interviewees' trust research. One forest technician interviewee said, I choose to believe that scientists are held accountable for the quality and soundness of their, quality and the soundness and the accuracy of their work and the results that they generate. This perception were supported by survey data. So based on Stern and Coleman's 4 forms of trust, this would be considered procedural trust. Affinitive trust, so built through personal relationships, also strongly influence trust and like willingness to collaborate. Interviewees said knowing a researcher personally made engagement easier. So one participant shared, I do work with researchers here. I've got a really good friend who's an ecologist. Survey data supported this as well. So while 75% of the survey respondents had a relationship with researchers, most knew 5 or fewer, suggesting that there is limited direct connection between forest professionals and researchers. So as a result, many forest professionals may be relying more on trust in the process rather than trust in individual. So finally, I'm going to talk about apathy towards research. So over half the interviewees noted this lack of incentive or interest in research among forest professionals, particularly those from older generations. So one forest technician remarked, they have very classical, rigid views about forestry and forest management. They're not as open to new ideas or new information. So apathy could also help explain the lower levels of interest and engagement observed among some of the older forest professionals. So Stern and Baird in a 2015 study also note that apathy could also be a consequence of eroded trust. So I know we're getting low on time and I don't want to keep talking forever. So yeah, going into the recommendations. So there were sort of 3 themes of recommendations that came out of my research, and these are specifically towards researchers. So the first, improve knowledge exchange. So start early, plan for knowledge exchange from the very beginning, build it into your research design, budgets, and timelines. Share regular updates throughout the project and not just at the end. And remember that timing does matter. So avoid like presenting research or disseminating research during the summer field season. Winter and spring are often better for engagement. I learned that the hard way as well. I disseminated my survey during the spring and summer months, and I didn't get as many respondents as I had hoped for. And I think I would have gotten a lot more if I had disseminated it during the fall or winter months. So use formats that the forest professionals prefer. So field tours, in-person talks, and newsletters. Avoid using overly academic jargon. Make your findings accessible. So when possible, try not to hide them behind or post them behind paywalls. Invest in strong communications and relationship skills, and just be empathetic, like understand and acknowledge the time pressures that forest professionals are under, and like be adaptable to that. So secondly, make research more relevant and actionable. So to do this, involve forest professionals in the designing phase. So learn what matters, their operations, and co-develop questions that address real-world challenges. And like always ask, how can this research be applied? Like helping while like all forms of research, I think are important. If you're doing more basic research, if you're able to help, bridge the gap about like what that can do for forest professionals can go a long way. And then finally, collaborate with a range of people to reduce perceptions of bias. So when researchers stay in academic silos, they can miss key perspectives or appear biased. And so working with diverse professionals across different sectors, roles, and backgrounds can help produce research that is perceived as more balanced. And just like being open, clear, and committed to helping forest professionals like see the value in their work and use that and that can really go a long way. Anyways, I think that was 30 minutes. So thank you for listening. Thank you.